Hey, what's going on, Steeler Nation? This is your man, Big B, Brian Hanley. Welcome to Steelers Almighty. This is our scouting report for week one against the Atlanta Falcons. We were able to get an interview from Aaron Freeman that does Locked On with the Falcons. So stick around. Make sure you stick around for that. But I've broken this game down and kind of given some tidbits on what I think the Steelers need to do number one, to win the game, what some of the key points, what the Falcons have going on with them, some of their strengths, weaknesses, all that good stuff. So we're going to break all that down for you today, man. So stick around till the end. Again, remember, Steelers Almighty, fastest growing YouTube channel, Steelers YouTube channel going on right now. So appreciate all your support, man. Let's dive in. So first things first, Atlanta, the personnel that they have on offense. Let's start with the quarterback, Kirk Cousins. You know, we know what he brings to the table. He's a steadying presence, something that Atlanta hasn't had since they said goodbye to Kirk Cousins, or not Kirk Cousins, but to Matt Ryan. So he's a steadying presence. Now, I get it. He's older, coming off an Achilles injury, so we'll see what his mobility looks like. From all indications, it looks okay, but we'll see. You know, and we know the Steelers are going to get after him, you know, whether it's outside rush, inside rush, zone pressure, whatever the case may be. We know the Steelers are going to bring some pressure, and they're going to see how Kirk Cousins reacts to that. I think the key is you got to kind of get him off his mark and see what they can do throwing the football. He does tend to throw the football to the Steelers when we put pressure on him. He's done that the last two times we've faced him. So that's going to be one of the keys. But he's definitely the cog here for the Atlanta Falcons. They paid him a ton of money to come in and be a steadying force. Well, he's that guy. Next up, I think Drake London. While Drake London doesn't have the spectacular wide receiver numbers, and the part of that I think is scheme, or at least it was, he's a very good receiver. Very good receiver. I think what he brings to the table, some explosiveness that I think Atlanta's going to try to take advantage of. Throw the ball down the field more. I think they're going to take advantage of that. And then last but not least, Bijan Robinson. Underrated, underutilized last year. I know Steeler fans are not going to like that now that Arthur Smith is, you know, our offensive coordinator. But Bijan was underutilized. And he was sharing carries. I get that, but super explosive. For him to get 214 carries last year, I mean, he averaged 4.6 yards a carry. If he gets up to 250 carries, what's he doing? You know, how many yards does he get then? Not to mention he can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's a home run hitter. I look for him to have a breakout season. I do. Just not breakout game one. You know, Steelers got to keep that under wraps. So, but Bijan Robinson, make no mistake, people, he is a big time running back that the Steelers are going to have to handle. Moving on to defense. Look, I think this guy is one of the most underrated football players in the National Football League. That is A.J. Terrell. Cornerback, just got a ton of money. Doesn't have the glamour stats, you know, a bunch of interceptions. Last year he didn't have any. But I think part of that is because people just don't throw him the football. You know, they don't go his way because Atlanta just maybe hasn't had the best corners on the other side. Big time corner, fifth year. Again, doesn't have the big glamour stats. You ask people around football how good this guy is, they'll tell you, great cornerback. So to me, he's their top defensive player. Jesse Bates, as a free safety. Look, the Steelers know all about Jesse Bates from his days in Cincinnati. He didn't slow down one bit, got big money to come to Atlanta, didn't slow down at all. Very, very good free safety. Not as good as Minka, don't get me wrong, but very, very good. Kind of solidified some stuff that was going on in the back end with the Falcons defense. And then I know he's a new arrival, but Matthew Judon. I think Judon is that key to that defense. Look, everybody knows the Falcons haven't been able to rush the passer in years. They just have not been able to do that. And I get Judon coming off an injury, a little bit older, but he's so smart. He knows how to pass rush. So even if all of his explosiveness isn't there like it was 3 years ago, he's so crafty and so smart in how he pass rushes, how he sets up things. Just he's going to be a force and something that Atlanta just hadn't seen in forever. They just hadn't. Again, I I don't know if he's going to have 15 sacks, but heck, I think Atlanta fans would take if he could get to 10, they would love it. They would absolutely love it. So those are the top three guys that I have on each side of the ball that the Atlanta Falcons have that the Steelers are going to have to try to handle. So let's move on here. Next up, let's talk about some of these matchups. So, first things first, Steelers defensive line against Atlanta's offensive line. I think the strength, you could say the Steelers front seven against Atlanta's defensive line. And maybe that's the better way to talk about it. The front seven of the Steelers is going to be incredible. With Patrick Queen, obviously TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, Cam Hay. It's just going to be a very good line, especially how some of the unsung guys are playing. Keanu Benton, I think, is going to have an incredible year. Larry Ogunjobi looks like he's trying to get back to what he was when he got his contract. DeMarvin Leal, it looks like the light has finally gone on for him. The Steelers front seven is I look, I said the Steelers could have a top 5 defense this year. It's going to start with those guys. That front seven. Moving to the Falcons offensive line, look, I mean, if you just watch football and you pay attention, I'm not necessarily just talking about PFF grades. You know how I feel about that. It's just a tool. Just a tool. The Falcons have a great offensive line. I mean, when you put it all together. Now, I'm not saying each individual player is spectacular, but lines have to work in a unit. And when you talk about working in a unit, I think they're top 5. I think they're probably top 3 as an offensive line. Absolutely. Maybe top 2. Top 2 offensive line. They're that good, people. They really are that good. So strength versus strength. Steelers, you know, their front seven against the Atlanta Falcons offensive line. I think that's a matchup that we're going to need to pay attention to all day on Sunday. Now, here's where the Steelers might have an advantage, though. The outside linebackers or the edge rushers. TJ Watt, best defensive player in the world. Alex Highsmith on the other side. Nick Herbig on the other side. And however you want to use that rotation. Don't be surprised if you don't see some Peyton Wilson rushing from the outside too, people. I'm just telling you, don't be surprised if you see it. I think that's where the Steelers have their advantage. Look, I get that the Falcons have a great offensive line, and they do. But that doesn't mean that you still can't take advantage of some of the spots. Look, Caleb McGarry at right tackle, he's going to have his hands full and probably get a ton of help trying to deal with TJ Watt. Jake Matthews, good left tackle. He is. But do we think Alex Highsmith and Nick Herbig can be better? And do we think that they can take advantage of it? Yeah, I think we do. I think we like that matchup because they're going to be singled. Jake Matthews is good. He's good. Let's not kid ourselves. I just like the matchup. I like the one-on-one matchup with Highsmith. Highsmith is so good, number one, against the run that he gets underrated, but his pass rush skills, they got better. Even though his sack numbers went down last year, I thought he was a better rusher in what he did last year. I really believe that. I like Alex Highsmith and Nick Herbig to be able to take advantage. Now, where the Steelers are going to struggle or could possibly struggle, the interior offensive line. Look, we're starting a rookie at center. Okay. We got a guy that's only played in 8 games that's going to be starting at left guard. The Falcons, on the other hand, they've got some guys, some older, experienced, rugged guys on their defensive front. Look, Grady Jarrett, we know what he's about. He's big, he's fast, he's twitchy. To be that big and to still be that twitchy at his age, Grady Jarrett is going to be a handful. David Amenyana, again, big, physical, gets after you at the point of attack. Look, I'm not saying that we're going to struggle. All I'm saying is those guys are really good, man. We're going to have to be physical. We're going to have to scheme some things, try to trick them, and double team them just to get them. I'm not even sure that you can necessarily move them off the line of scrimmage, but you got to get them out of the hole. You got to do something. But those guys are really good. That would be where I would say Atlanta is going to have an advantage, especially if we're just talking about the offense and defensive lines. There's some other advantages and matchups that I believe that Atlanta has, but I think this is the biggest one in my eyes. Moving on. Now, coaching, look, Atlanta's got a brand new staff. Raheem Morris, I think he's going to do great. He wasn't ready to be a head coach in Tampa. Look, he just wasn't. Um, Not to mention the situation that he got put in. Look, you knew you were going to be terrible, and then they were terrible, and then they fired him. Well, I mean, we've seen that happen many, many times in the National Football League. He was one of those guys. He gets another opportunity. I think it was 15 years later. You're ready for the job. I think he's going to be a good job. Number one, because his situation is better. But number two, 15 years of more experience, man, that has to help. It has to help. Taking a look at who he's got, Zach Robinson as his offensive coordinator and Jimmy Lake defensive coordinator, although quasi defensive coordinator is going to be Raheem Morris. Having said all of that, man, I like their staff, but I still believe the Steelers are better. Look, I know a lot of people don't like Mike Tomlin. I know a lot of people think that his time has passed. The way that he plays football and tries to win games is outdated. But the history is still the history. And I'm going to bring up, yes, he's never had a losing season. I know. That doesn't mean anything. And I've been the first person to scream that. Not having a losing season hasn't meant anything in the last 7 years. But facts are still facts. You still hadn't had a losing season. So that does mean something. Again, I get it. Relax. I'm not singing the praises of Mike Tomlin, but I think we have a coaching advantage there. Now, let's go to what we believe is going to be the outcome. Look, break this down. The game is in Atlanta. They're going to have a home field advantage. That crowd's going to be just absolutely insane. First game of the year, but you also know there's going to be some Steeler fans there. We're going to sneak our way into Mercedes-Benz Dome in downtown Atlanta. I don't know what the split of the crowd is going to be. Atlanta's got good fans. They'll have a lot of people there, but we'll be there. We'll show our face, but they have that advantage. Now moving on to coaching. I just went over that. Mike Tomlin has the advantage here. He's more experienced. His success, he has had a ton of success. Look, while we might think that Raheem Morris is going to be better, we've seen what his resume actually is as a head coach. Not good. Not good. Good as an assistant, as a defensive coordinator, but not as a head coach. Mike Tomlin has that advantage all day long. The history between the two teams, they don't play that often. But when they do, the Steelers have won the last 4 times they played. So I don't know if that means anything now. But again, the last 4 times that they have locked up against each other, the Steelers have been able to win those football games. The roster, with the late additions, Justin Simmons at safety, Matthew Judon, previously I had this as even, that the rosters were even. With those late additions, I think Atlanta has a better roster than the Pittsburgh Steelers. I do. Does that mean that they're just an all out and out better team? I don't know that it means that. But if you're just matching up rosters, I think they actually have a better roster than what the Pittsburgh Steelers have, excuse me. The matchups, look, I think Atlanta has more matchups. We talked about the interior line. We talked about the Steelers' advantage on the edges, but think about their secondary. AJ Terrell, Justin Simmons, Jesse Bates. We have Pickens, and I know Freiermuth is supposed to be a big part. Who else? I'm not saying that Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin can't do those things. All I'm saying is, for what we know going into this game, I would say that the matchups belong to Atlanta, that they have better matchups than we do. Doesn't mean it'll work out that way, because if you take advantage of the one matchup and strength that you have, you can win a football game, which brings me to the outcome. I think the Steelers win the game. I think the Steelers win a game. It's going to be close, but I think the Steelers win. They're going to take advantage of the turnover margin. For what I mentioned earlier, getting on the edges. We're going to pressure Kirk Cousins. He'll throw us the football. We just got to catch it. And the last 2 times we faced Kirk Cousins, we've caught it. I think that happens again. I think the Steelers end up winning 23-20. That's my assessment of what is going on with this matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. All right, everybody. We got Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons. Look, he knows a ton about the organization. He's been covering them for a while. We were able to get him on and kind of go a little bit back and forth on what, some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses of the Falcons, where he saw this game play out. So I thought it was important that we bring some of that to you. If we can get these creators to keep coming on, man, we're going to keep doing it. So as far as our scouting report is concerned, so we appreciate it. We got Aaron Freeman coming up next. All right, so joining us today on our scouting report, we've got Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons joining us to talk about the matchup between the Steelers and the Falcons on Sunday. Aaron, how are you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. Love talking football. Season's back. It's fall weather starting to hit. It's like everything's hitting right about now. So I'm glad to be here talking
Yeah,
Falcons and
absolutely.
Steelers football.
I mean, it is great. I'm here in Dallas, and the weather. It seemed like it must have known because it's been 100 degrees for 2 months,
Yeah,
and it must know that football season is here because it instantly changed. We've been in the mid 80s, and I love it. It is football time, man. So again, we want to thank you for giving us some time today to talk about this matchup and joining us. First things first, just give us a little overall on the Falcons, what the temperature of the Falcons is right now as an organization currently.
well, I think there's a lot of excitement in Atlanta. You got a new head coach in Raheem Morris. He's brought a different energy into the building than what Arthur Smith had in Atlanta the past couple of years. You have a new quarterback in Kirk Cousins, feeling like that's been a major glaring weakness for the Falcons the last couple of seasons
Right.
since they moved on from Matt Ryan, sort of getting a stable veteran presence back at that position, which they had for a very long time. That's bringing a lot more excitement. You have all these young pieces at the skill position players like Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. They flashed their potential, but they haven't really turned into the potential superstars that I think a lot of people expected them to be when they all three were top 10 picks over the last couple of years for the Falcons. And now the expectation is we'll see that come to fruition. And then you have sort of a strong foundation of veteran players on the defensive side of the ball with the team picking up guys like Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons at the outside linebacker and safety spots, respectively, two Pro Bowl players to really plug some much needed roles on that defense to enhance the pass rush, to enhance a secondary that already had one of the best safeties in the NFL in Jesse Bates, a cornerback in AJ Terrell, who just got a big bag of money and is one of the highest paid corners in the NFL. And then you have really two strong interior defensive linemen in Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. And so you're just kind of hoping all this comes together so the Falcons can break their streak of missing the playoffs, going into year 7. They've missed it 6 years in a row. And so I think there's a lot of excitement down in Atlanta for what this season could wind up being after, it's been a while since the Falcons have been a good football team. They've been competitive these last couple of years, but an actual good football team. And I think a lot of people are excited about that.
Gotcha. Let me start right there with the defense. You mentioned Grady Jarrett and David Amata as far as being defensive stoppers, inside defensive tackles. They're going to be going up against, I should say, a rebuilt Steelers offensive line. It's going to be a rookie, Zach Frazier at center. Going to be a first year starter anyway, not first year guy. Spencer Anderson at left guard. The Falcons were pretty good against the run last year. I gotta believe, maybe not necessarily licking their chops, but this is one of those matchups the Falcons feel like they might be able to take advantage of.
Absolutely. I think, I would say that I think they're licking their chops going up against the Steelers offensive line. They have some familiarity with what this offense looks like, having played under Arthur Smith the last 3 years. And
Right.
so I think this defensive line is ready to go out there and terrorize something. And that's not something that we have said about the Falcons in a very long time, having that type of unit that could really make a young Steelers offensive line, especially at those two spots you mentioned, kind of expose them. I
Right.
think that's the hope that the Falcons want. They want to show, hey, welcome to the NFL. These are, high level D tackles that you're going to have to face, and now you got to be able to block these guys if you want to have success in this league. And I hope they expect this to be kind of a teaching moment
Right.
for those young guys.
Gotcha. Looking at Matthew Judon and being able to pick him up when you did, How big? I mean, look, Atlanta has struggled getting to the passer for, quite some time. It's just not been a thing that they've been able to do consistently. How big is that for the Falcons to be able to pick up a guy, even at a little bit of an advanced age? Matthew Judon is still a very, very productive player. How big is that for Atlanta?
It's huge, right? And I know Steeler fans are not familiar with this concept because the Steelers have consistently had one of the best pass rushers in the NFL for the last decade.
Right.
Well, the Falcons have had the exact opposite. So just if you can wrap your head around the Steelers fans, I know it's impossible to do. Like, what is it like to not have a pass rush? But just imagine the exact opposite of what you have. Like, where
Right.
the Steelers are good, the Falcons are terrible. That's basically what the Falcons pass rush has been. And you're right. I think Matthew Judon is sort of a big piece. And yeah, the one question is, how much does he have left in the tank at age 32, 33, wherever he is at this point in time? And yeah, there's probably not, he's not a long-term solution, but as far as a stopgap that can help this team get over that hump and get into the playoffs immediately, given that they do have some older players like Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata, they do have an older quarterback. You want to maximize this window that you still have these veterans players in, and I think Matthew John is definitely going to help. The Falcons have not had a double-digit sack artist since 2016, since they went to the Super Bowl.
Right.
And that was Vic Beasley. And that did not last particularly long. And Matthew Judon is the first guy they've really had since then that legitimately has a chance to get 10 sacks. And again, I know Steeler fans are like, that's so easy. We have like three of those guys that get 10 sacks every single year. But, just imagine not having any of those guys and trying to deal with that.
You mentioned something, not being in the playoffs over the last 6 seasons. It's going on 7 seasons this year, and we're going to get into quarterback play. I think that's part of it because, look, I think if the Falcons just had competent quarterback play last year, I don't know if Arthur Smith is still the coach, but maybe he is because I think they win the division and they get into the playoffs. So, how stabilizing has it been to get Kirk Cousins again? I know he's coming off the injury, 36, he's a little older. I get that part, but how stabilizing has it been to get him into the building?
It's huge, right? That was the issue with the Falcons. You're absolutely right. The Falcons were basically like a couple of plays because like two games several games they were in it, and Desmond Ritter made some untimely turnovers late in games that kind of cost them. And you're right. I think they didn't need elite quarterback play in order to win that division last year. You saw that with the Bucks, who won the division, and Baker Mayfield was fine for most of the season. He turned it on in late in the year, and played his best ball down the stretch, and that was a big reason why the Bucks were able to win that division. And I think that's really the key with Kirk Cousins. Is Kirk Cousins the player that he has been at his peak? Probably not anymore, but that floor that he's going to set, that consistency that you're going to get week in and week out that you weren't getting the last couple of years with Desmond Ritter, with Marcus Mariota, I think is going to be huge for the Falcons. And that's sort of, you talked about the stability. That's really what it is. It's all
Right.
about stability to go out there and have a quarterback that can do the job, get the ball into the hands of his playmakers consistently, and just kind of be a grown up and run this offense and get these young guys on the same page. I think that was the real big issue with Desmond Ritter besides the turnovers, where as a young quarterback, he didn't necessarily have the authority to say, hey, I need you to run this route and be here and do this thing. And the timing has to, like, they were still working that process to get on the same page. And now Kirk Cousins has come in and basically like, okay, you guys got to get on my page because I'm going to run this thing. And it feels like the young players, Drake London, Kyle Pitts especially, have really responded well to that. And so I think that's going to be huge for the Falcons this year.
Hearing some stuff today. First of all, the Falcons situation and the Steelers, as far as older quarterback with a younger guy, kind of the same. Circumstances are a little bit different. Kirk got a big deal, possibly could be there a little bit longer. Where Penix got drafted, where Justin Fields, they traded for him. He's behind it. Although, we heard literally just a few minutes ago, Russell Wilson was limited at practice with a calf injury. I'm not sure how that's going to turn out. So it might be Justin Fields out there. I suspect that Falcon fans are pretty excited about Penix. Not only excited that, but the coaching staff has to really like him. He didn't even play in the last preseason game, Aaron. When guys aren't doing that, when you're a rookie, first of all, I think they believe they really got something, and he must be really good.
Yeah, yeah. I was a little disappointed. We didn't get to see him in the last two preseason games, and I was disappointed not because it was like, oh, he needed to work in order to be successful, but it was just like, we just want to see our new toys. That's all,
Right.
as fans, we just want to see the new toys out there playing football. And so it's just like I just want to get a glimpse of what it's going to look like in the future when Penix takes over. But yeah, I think in his debut against the Dolphins, he looked impressive. He did what you sort of expected him to do. Now he's going to have to sort of ride the pine for a couple of years if all things go according to plan. We'll see how that all plays out. But I think he's going to be put in a position to succeed with some of the talent that the Falcons have already assembled, and so we'll see what goes from there. But certainly, at least from what little we got this summer from Michael
Right.
Penix, it's been impressive so far.
Gotcha. Well, let's kind of dig into this matchup a little bit here. First thing is matchups are concerned. We already talked about the D line and the Steelers' young offensive line. Let's talk a little bit AJ Terrell. I think one of the more underrated corners in the league. I think he's really good. He got paid like he was really good. I just don't, for some reason, Aaron, I don't think he gets the respect that other guys do. And maybe because he's not the loudest guy out there or something of that nature. I don't know. I think he's really good. Is that going to be a match of him and George Pickens? Is he going to follow him around since the Steelers don't necessarily have a big time, or you would even quantify it as a real number two receiver?
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the questions we're going to have. The Falcons have a new defensive coordinator, Jimmy Lake. He's never called plays at the professional level. And so, if you're basing it off of Raheem Morris's tendencies in LA and Jimmy Lake's tendencies when he was a longtime defensive coordinator at the University of Washington, it doesn't seem like they're huge fans of the idea of using that shadow corner
Right.
and whatnot. But I do think the Falcons, or at least have that in their back pocket if they want to, because I think you mentioned it, the one matchup that you're worried about in the Steelers offense on the outside is George Pickens, and you want to put your best corner on him. And I agree with you. AJ Terrell is very underrated. I think the main reason is because he hasn't gotten any interceptions the last 2 years.
Right.
And you know how this sport is covered, where
Absolutely.
it's like you got to make the game changing plays,
Yep.
or else people largely ignore you. And some of that is owed to corners having stone hands. Some of that's owed to quarterbacks basically being like, hey, we don't need to test him, because the Falcons have basically had a revolving door at the cornerback spot opposite him ever since he came in the league. AJ Terrell's been a starter since he was a first round pick in 2020. This is his 5th year, and this will be the 5th different opening day starting corner opposite him up to this point. And so teams are just like, oh yeah, that guy's good. Why throw at him? Throw at the other guy. Like whoever that other guy is, he's not good enough to stick around for more than a year. So we'll just throw at that guy. So I think those are some of the contributing factors to why you haven't seen necessarily the game changing plays from AJ Terrell these last couple of years. But I agree with you. If I was the Falcons, I would basically, yes, I want him on George Pickens as much as possible. And if he can sort of keep him contained, I don't know if the Steelers have enough firepower elsewhere to really threaten the rest of the Falcons defense.
Right. Moving on, another big matchup. Look, the Steelers, by all accounts, are going to have a really good defense. They had a good one last year, even when a lot of guys were hurt. The Falcons' offensive line, I have no problem saying this at all. If they're not the best offensive line in football, they're not third. Okay, I can say that. I'll say that with my chest out. But the Steelers' defensive line, especially the two outside linebackers, they will get after you. I think that's a big matchup that we're looking at, and the Steelers are going to try to take some advantages there. They've gotten some better play. Cam Hayward may be back, not maybe back, looks to be back healthy. I know he's 35, but he says he's healthy, fresh off a new deal. Is that something that the Falcons are worried about, being able to try to control the Steelers' defensive pressure?
Absolutely. I think that's the main thing when anybody plays the Pittsburgh Steelers. Doesn't matter how good your offensive line is. They have more than enough talent up front to cause problems. And so I think, with the attention that TJ Watt's going to get, I expect him to get chipped as much as possible. That's going to create some one-on-ones for other players. And as you mentioned, Alex Highsmith has taken advantage of those opportunities that he's gotten every single week for the last couple of years, better than probably anybody else. And it's why he's been a very productive pass rusher. He'll be probably going up against Jake Matthews, who is comfortable being on an island. But, there are times where Jake is one of the better left tackles in the league, but there are games where he can have a rough outing. And so it's up to Highsmith to have one of those bad games for Jake Matthews. And then I think the main concern for me with the Falcons going into this game up front is on the interior more so than the
Right.
tackles. Just because, again, I think Caleb McGarry, the right tackle, is going to get help to block TJ Watt, and I think Jake Matthews should hold his own against Alex Highsmith. But the interior is a little bit more untested, and As you mentioned, Cam Hayward will be going up against the Falcons' second-year left guard Matthew Bergeron. Hayward is a very powerful defensive tackle that's very good at collapsing the pocket. The one thing that Bergeron struggled with in his rookie year was dealing with powerful defensive tackles. So that's a massive matchup potential advantage for the Steelers. Keanu Benton, I think, is one of the up-and-coming players in the league. He'll get some one-on-ones against an undersized center in Drew Dalman. That's a matchup that he could potentially take advantage. Chris Lindstrom, the Falcons' best interior guy, right guard, probably will go up against Larry Ogunjobi. I expect Lindstrom to be fine in that game because I think he's one of the better guards in the league. But there have been times where Chris Lindstrom, last year especially, where he has struggled against high caliber D tackles. And, I think of the Tennessee game where Jeffrey Simmons kind of ate his lunch. And there was
Right.
a couple of games against Carolina where Derek Brown got the better of him. And so if Ogunjobi can have games like that, that can really cause havoc for this Falcons offense with a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, who's purely a pocket quarterback. He was purely a pocket quarterback before the injury. He's definitely going to be even more of a pocket quarterback post Achilles tear. And so if you can get that interior pressure on Kirk Cousins, that can really create problems for a quarterback like him, having that muddy pocket that he won't be able to step up into. He's not going to necessarily extend plays outside the pocket. So if you can collapse that pocket, this Steelers defensive line can really create problems for the Falcons offense. And so that's going to be the biggest challenge. And I think the Falcons offensive line is up for that challenge, but we will find out on Sunday.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I think we probably covered it, but just real quick, two more, and I'll get you out of here. Keys to victory for Atlanta if they were going to win this football game. I've got some stuff that I put in about the Steelers, but what are some of the keys or the major key for Atlanta to win this game?
Yeah, I think it starts with the battle in the trenches. As I mentioned, I think they have to keep Kirk Cousins upright. If they can, then he'll be able to find his playmakers and make some plays. I think you want to see this Falcons offense be explosive as well. Drake London is their primary wide receiver, and he's expected to kind of have the Puka Nakua role in this Zach Robinson-led offense. Zach Robinson coming from that Rams coaching tree. And we saw what Puka Nakua did against the Steelers defense last year. Had a big day in that Week 7 matchup, and you're hoping to sort of see Drake London go off in a similar way. And if they can do that and generate some explosive plays, that will be huge because trying to march the ball down the field against the Steelers defense is virtually impossible. Putting together these long drives against this defense is just really hard. I looked up the stat, and I think they had the second fewest 10 plus yard 10 plus play scoring drives against them last year, behind only I think the Cleveland Browns. And so it's just you need those chunk yardage plays if you're going to be able to move the ball successfully and get the ball in the end zone against the Steelers. So I would say the first one is keeping Kirk upright. The second one on offense is getting those explosive plays, especially if they can come from Jake London and Kyle Pitts. I think establishing the run for the Falcons. If they can run the ball with Bijan Robinson and get him matched up against maybe some questionable linebacker. I know they added Patrick Queen, but Elandon Roberts isn't necessarily known for being a great coverage guy. If you can get some isolated one-on-ones with Bijan and him in the open field, I think Bijan can do some damage in the passing game, but also in the running game. And then I think the other key for the defense is just control the line of scrimmage, and that starts with stopping the run. Arthur Smith's offense, as I mentioned earlier, the Falcons are very familiar with it. It's a conservative offense. They're going to run the ball a lot on early downs. I think that's the goal of the Steelers. Is why I think Mike Tomlin brought him in to reestablish that run game. And so if the Falcons can sort of stop the run on early downs and get into some third and longs, then I think these pass rushers can maybe tee off and expose some deficiencies on that young Steelers offensive line. So those to me are kind of the big keys for victory for the Falcons.
Gotcha. And then Arthur Smith coming back. Look, the fans obviously are going to have some hostility with him coming back. That kind of goes without saying. But is there any hostility? I mean, the guys are professionals. Don't get me wrong. Any hostility or anything with him coming back amongst the players this week?
I think there will be some players that are will happily embrace Arthur Smith, and I think there are some players that will happily embrace him and also be like I can't wait to murder you today. So
Gotcha.
you know how that is with
Yes.
players. They're all professionals and whatnot, but I remember when the NFLPA put out their grades last year. I think Arthur Smith got a C plus, and that was like the second lowest grade of any head coach in the league last year. So clearly he wasn't necessarily completely beloved by the
Right.
entire locker room, but obviously he couldn't have been that much hated because a whole bunch of Falcon players left Atlanta last year to go to Pittsburgh this year. So clearly some guys still enjoyed him, and a bunch of players have commented that they'll be happy to see him again after especially I think some of the young guys that basically were drafted by Arthur Smith. He's the
Right.
only coach that they ever knew. But I think maybe some of the other veteran players are like, yeah, I've played under different coaches, and he's not necessarily at the top of my totem pole or my power rankings of all the coaches I played under.
Absolutely. Aaron, I'm going to put you on the spot. Who wins Sunday?
I think the Falcons will win. I think it's going to be a low scoring physical football game, but I think the Falcons will walk away with like a 20-17 victory.
Gotcha. Well, again, man, I appreciate you giving us the time today on Steelers Almighty to kind of break down this game a little bit and tell us a little bit about the Falcons. I ran through it a little bit at the top. Tell us where we can find you and all your stuff, Aaron.
Absolutely. You can find me each and every day on Locked On Falcons. It's free and available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast.
All right. We appreciate it. Thank you guys, and we will be right back. All right, so that's basically what I think about what's going to happen with the game. Look, we heard from Aaron Freeman, like I said, locked on at Falcons. He likes the Falcons. I like the Steelers. You could say that we're both being homers when it comes down to it, but I just think the matchup. Look, I know that the Falcons have a better matchup against the Steelers. I know they have a better roster. You could say, depending on who plays at quarterback, because we don't know at this point in time whether it's going to be Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, that they have the better quarterback right now. Okay, that's fine. But you know what? If you take advantage of your matchup to the best of your ability, if the Steelers front seven says you're not running the football and we're going to put tons of pressure on Kirk Cousins, you can win a football game regardless on whether you have most of the matchups or not, regardless if your roster isn't better than the other team's roster. I believe that's what's going to happen. I think the Steelers get a late turnover. They turn that into a field goal or however it works out. I just believe the Steelers win 23-20. I appreciate all you all. Remember to like, follow, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff, man. The season's here. The season is here. Here we go.